100% purely instinctive shooting. I shot that way for years and years, and I was probably the best I've ever been. I don't think that way works for everybody, but I do think for those who can actually master it, that is the absolute best way to hunt with a traditional bow. These days, I can't shoot as much as I used to when I was younger. I'm in my mid-50s, and I've had shoulder problems, and I've had to drop down in bow poundage. But if you're young and tough, and if you've got good shoulders, and you can shoot 4 or 5 days a week, and you can really get the reps in, I don't think there is a better way to bow hunt than purely 100% instinctive shooting. I did another video about 3 or 4 months ago called Gapstinctive. I can't remember what I called it, but it was really popular, and that's the way I shoot now, because I'd be honest, I only shoot my bow, probably every couple of weeks. But doing that technique, I'm really good, and I can maintain hunting level accuracy, out to about 25, 30 yards really easy doing that technique. But like I said, if I was 20, 30 years younger again, I would shoot purely instinctive. If I got out there every single day and shot my bow, and if you have the physical means to do that and the time to do that, and if it takes, I still think that 100% instinctive shooting is the absolute best way that you can bow hunt. Let me walk through with you guys how I do this. Now, there's a couple of reasons that I think instinctive shooting is probably the best way to bow hunt when mastered. And what comes to my mind first is probably watching a good quarterback in a football game. And he's just so fluid. He can hit moving targets, he can hit static targets, he can hit close range targets. He can start that pass when the receiver's 45 feet away, and somehow that they can merge together, and he's just really in sync with what he's doing. A good instinctive shooter, if you'll watch them, they can hit birds out of the air and coins out of the air, and they can do really amazing things that most shooters are not going to hit that level. But still, you can get I guess what I'm trying to say is you can get really fluid with that other techniques don't allow. So I'm not advising that you take bad shots or unethical shots on game, but most other bow hunting aiming techniques, that animal has got to be still, and he's got to be unalert. You've got to have a good broadside or quartering away shot. And if you're really a good instinctive shot, it's just so much more fluid. You can get away with a whole lot more. Another reason is lighting. Where I hunt in East Texas, typically the deer don't really start moving until it's almost pitch black, especially here in October. They just, in bow season, they don't hardly move in the daylight. So that last 5 minutes before legal light is when most animals come out. And other techniques, if a guy's using sight pins or if he's gapping off that arrow point, a good instinctive shooter is not looking at that arrow point. He is just looking at the spot on that animal that he wants to kill, that he wants to hit, I'm sorry. But there's a couple of reasons that, like I said, I think it is probably one of the more difficult techniques to master, but I think if you can get it down pat, that's going to make you the best, most successful bow hunter that you can be. On this video, I don't want to get too much into archery form. There's so much written by everybody else, and for the most part, using your back muscles, your release, your bow hand, your bow arm, your stance, all of that is going to be the same with instinctive shooting. Your anchor, when I shot instinctive shooting, I shot the Mediterranean style draw, which, it was a split finger, and I anchored with my middle finger in the corner of my mouth. Now, you can also shoot instinctive shooting anchoring 3 fingers under the arrow up high, under your eye. Either way works. You shoot it enough either way, and you just stick to that one way, your mind is going to learn that. It's going to learn the trajectory of the arrow. And I will say, I think you're going to pick it up faster the closer you get that arrow to underneath your eye. But your bow also, if you shoot a bunch of bows, you're going to notice on average that bow is going to have less hand shock, and it's going to be quieter with a split finger release, split finger anchor. So either way you do that does not really matter. So getting into this, the first thing is you want to have good archery technique. You want to have good form. You want to draw with your back. You want to have a good release. You want to have a good stance. You want to grip your bow properly. Good bow arm. I don't want to get into all that because, basically there's so much on the internet that's already covered. Now, I will say this. The one thing that I think you really want to do when you're shooting purely instinctive that is not so important or even necessary with other techniques is you really want to cant that bow. When I'm shooting purely instinctive, I like to cant that bow as much as 45 degrees. Now, there's a couple of reasons I like to cant my bow when I'm doing this. And one is when you're instinctive shooting, I was mentioning it, you're fluid. And, if you're just rigid and you've got this nice target stance, you're not fluid. Well, canting your bow, especially if you've got limbs you're trying to get under, or you're trying to miss part of your deer stand or brush blind or whatever you're doing, canting your bow makes you more fluid. And just, when you're moving, it just gives you kind of a more of a combat stance. If you ever watch somebody shoot pistols, combat tactics versus target pistols. So that's one reason. Canting your bow makes you a little more fluid. The main reason I like to cant, and I'm not looking at that arrow, but still, canting my bow way over like that lets me get on top of that arrow. And getting my eye right on top of that arrow really is going to help you line up better and make a good shot. It's going to make this eye-mind-target connection a whole lot more easy. So I really suggest canting your bow, anywhere from 20 to 45 degrees. Heck, when you really learn how to shoot instinctive, you can shoot that thing flat this way. You can shoot it upside down, put your finger like that, But you kind of want to get out of the thought process of having to hold that bow to perfectly vertical or just barely canting it, because, the fluidity of it is just going to make you a whole lot more flexible and able to hit targets that aren't just, perfectly static, stationary targets. Another thing is on your stance. Now, when you have a good target stance, you've got, which I probably don't have the best form, but somebody has got a really rigid, static target stance. And you want to be, when you're shooting instinctively, like I said, you're more like a quarterback. You want to kind of have those knees a little flexible. Now, I'm not talking, you see some of these guys shooting instinctive and they're doing I don't think, they're squatting way down like they're exercising. I don't think that helps you at all. I mean, that looks neat, but I've seen enough people shooting that way and then slinging arrows 3 feet too high and missing everything they shoot at. I really don't think that helps you much. In fact, I think it just kind of looks ridiculous. So, but I do think a little bit of flexibility, a looser stance, just barely breaking your knees, just a little bit. I think that you'll kind of want that more relaxed stance. So when you're shooting purely instinctive, I think you ought to be a little bit more flexible. right, let's talk about how I do this. Now, when I'm shooting a traditional bow instinctively, I do not want to look at that arrow. I mean, I do not want to look at the tip. I don't want to look at the shaft. I don't want to even know that arrow is there. Now, I also know that your peripheral, your subconscious, your peripheral vision, whatever you want to call it, is seeing that arrow tip. That thing is right out there in front of you, so there's no way your eyes are not seeing that arrow. But consciously, you do not want to look at that arrow. Now, there's all the other ways I shoot you do, but shooting 100% purely instinctive shooting, I do not want to look at that arrow. So what is going to happen is my subconscious is going to see that arrow point. Now, I don't know if that arrow point is 2 inches below or 7 inches below or 10 inches, but my subconscious does. And I do this from different distances, from 5 yards all the way back to 50 or 60, over and over and over and over, using the same bow, the same arrow, and my mind is going to learn the trajectory of that. Now, if you jump from bow to bow and you're constantly changing your setup, it's going to be a whole lot harder to pick this up. So get you one bow, one arrow, don't change the components of that arrow, just stick with it until you've got this, because anytime you go to changing that up, well, you've put another component in your mind that you've got to deal with. So you're not going to look at the arrow, you're not even going to know that arrow is there, even though your subconscious is seeing it. The other thing, when you start out, you want a big target like this, and I've got another video showing how I made this. If you don't have something like this, try to get you, get up next to a big dirt bank, a pile of sand, something where you have zero fear of missing, losing an arrow or anything. And all you want to concentrate on, you've got this whole huge backstop, but you want to concentrate just on a small dot. Even if it's smaller than that, even if it's like the size of a thumbnail, you're good. So the smaller you can just focus, draw all your attention down to this one spot right here is what you want to do. Now, you want to start out about 5 yards. And, like I said, we're going to shoot just like you shot we're going to use good archery form. Really, the only thing we're going to do different is you're going to cant your bow, and I would try to be just a little, not much, but just a little more flexible in my form, a little more give in my knees, a little bit opener stance, just a little more, free feeling. But start out, about 5 yards, just focusing on that one dot. The other thing is don't shoot groups. And I don't like to shoot groups, period. Any technique, I don't like to shoot groups. I do in these videos because people want to see you shooting groups. And they say, well, if you can't group arrows together, you can't shoot. Well, that's not true. If you can take one arrow and you can shoot it and make a good shot, walk up there, relax, concentrate, shoot it again, hit the good spot, hit it right where you want to hit, well, you're a good shot. We can't really do that on these videos because it would take forever. But just take one arrow. Don't try to shoot groups. Just take one arrow, concentrate, put all your concentration into that one spot you want to hit. Think about it, pull it out, relax, do it again. When you're hunting, it's very rare that you have more than one shot opportunity anyway. So that is extremely important. Shoot one arrow at a time. Put everything in your mental and physical being into hitting this spot. Now, a lot of the old timers, they use a swing draw, where they had their bow down here and they kind of swang and came up like that. I think that's a really good way to practice, but I think that's a lousy way to hunt. So, especially if you're a deer hunter, I've never hunted anywhere in my life where you can get away with this. Where I'm at, it's extremely hard to even get, if you're behind a tree, to get your bow to full draw without being seen. I do think that's a good way because you don't focus on the arrow. I think that swing draw lets you practice by just looking at that spot. And, if you practice like that, believe it will transfer over to just holding your bow up and drawing. So you practice both ways. And, this instinctive thing will also work good just like this. If that's what you want to, if you really want to get into trying to get good and hit moving targets or aerial targets, I think the swing draw is the best way. Just know that that is not going to work for deer hunting. I mean, I have hunted a lot of deer, and I have never hunted in a place where you can get away with that. But, you know, that's okay to practice that way, shoot moving targets that way, but when it actually comes to deer hunting, you're going to want to set your arm out there and draw your bow, because you want to have as little movement as possible. Now that's the swing draw I'm talking about. That's a good way to practice. I don't like that way for hunting. But if you'll look back in my other videos, you'll know that I normally hold a good bit longer and aim. I'm not doing that. I'm not snap shooting, but I'm not at full draw very long. So my release, I'm just holding that thing back just a very short time. Now, it's important to say you don't want to develop a snap shooting problem. And what the snap shooting is where you just, a lot of guys will do it and they get faster and faster and faster at releasing, to the point they either can't get to full draw, or as soon as they touch, they're gone. So you want to be sure. What I recommend is once you get back, just to pause and hold for at least a second or two. And that will prevent that target panic snap shooting from setting in. But instinctive shooting, I do hold a lot shorter time than I do on my regular Gapstinctive shooting. So that's the swinged arm draw, and I haven't shot this way in 30 years, but you know, it's kind of like riding a bike, it stays with you. But you can see I canted it more, and it's kind of, I was still shooting 3 fingers under the arrow, just because my bow and knock height and everything is tuned that way. You'll have to tune your bow different if you're going to shoot split finger. But this technique works either way. You know, the Comanche Indians down here in Texas, they used to anchor down here, so it really doesn't matter where you anchor. Those guys were good enough, they could shoot that way underneath a horse and put 6 arrows in a Texas Ranger riding at 30 miles an hour on the back underneath the belly of a horse. So, you know, doesn't matter where you anchor. If you practice enough, that way you'll get good at it. All right, when you're shooting, you know, traditional, like the way I shoot, or a target stance, you know, you're going to be more upright with your bow up like this, and your stance is going to be more straight on with the target, and you're pulling back like this. When I'm shooting instinctive, I like a more open stance. And so what I'm saying is that puts you a little, squares you up a little bit more with the target. And what that's going to do, unfortunately, that shortens your draw length a little bit. But, you know, I also kind of like, you know, rather than a stiff, rigid target stance, you know, we've got a more open, kind of a little bit squatty, you know, aggressive, you know, whatever you want to call it. But I don't recommend hunting like this, but I think it's a really good way to practice this locked arm swing draw. I think I've heard it called. I mean, Fred Aspel talked about that. Howard Hill kind of shot that way. Lots of different people in the past have shot that way. And basically, you know, you're bringing the target up, the bow up, and coming straight back about the last probably 5 or 7 inches. So it's up and back. But kind of the way that looks is, you know, I've got a target there, so looking up, and I'm looking at the target, I'm aiming while the bow is still down. I'm really looking hard at that target. I'm swinging up, just kind of like that. Now that's one way to practice. Like I said, I recommend practicing like that and hunting a different way. But if you just want to practice the way you hunt, you know, you still have your kind of open stance, and you can go ahead and set your bow basically like you would have it, and then draw back and shoot. So that's real good too. You just really want to make an effort to not look at that arrow point. So kind of the way that would be is, you know, I've got my open, aggressive stance. So I've got my bow up here, and the arrow and bow are both kind of down out of the way, and I'm just burning a hole in that target at the spot I want to hit. I'm just, everything in me is just concentrating on that hole. I've already got my bow up, so I'm just gonna that's pretty much how you do that. Now, starting out, you want to draw all your attention down just to this spot. I don't recommend shooting at 3D targets or paper plates or bullseye targets or anything. Just put you a little spot. Start out about 5 yards. When you can hit this thing every time or real close to it, move back another 5 yards or 2.5 yards. And just keep going back. Don't go back too fast. The worst thing you can do is move back too fast. So shoot this thing. If you have to stay here a week, once you get where you can hit this every time at 5 yards, move back to 7.5 or 10 yards. Then do it, then move back to 15, then 20. Now, as far as hunting goes, this is my personal opinion, and I know a lot of people have other opinions on this matter, but I really don't think you should use purely instinctive hunting purely instinctive shooting, that is, when you hunt past 20 yards. I think there are better techniques when you get out farther like that. I think there's a whole lot more consistent ways to shoot. Now, I think you should practice instinctive shooting, heck, out to 50, 60, even 100 yards if you want to do that, because, it helps you learn the trajectory of that bow and arrow. But when it comes to actually bow hunting, I think 20 yards is about as far as you ought to do this. And the reason I say that is when you're shooting at an animal, you don't have a spot on there, and you're going to have to burn a hole on that 3D target, or that deer or bear or hog, whatever you're shooting at. You're going to have to visualize one of these. And the closer you are, the easier it is to visualize a dot like this. Most of us can get pretty dang good out to about 20 yards. We can look at a crease on that deer's shoulder, or a hair, or a little muscle tone, or something that we can picture like a dot like that real easy. But once you get past 20 yards, especially in fading light, it gets a lot harder to do that. So keep your hunting distances within 20 yards and practice as far back as you possibly can. So I think that's very important advice. I think instinctive shooting, purely instinctive, once it is learned, is the #1 best way you can possibly bow hunt. And like I said before, I don't do that anymore. I shoot the Gapstinctive, and I highly recommend all of y'all, if you haven't seen it, to watch that video, because I think anybody can take that other technique and real quick get good with it. And this is, I think, a better way to hunt, but I will be honest with you, most of you guys aren't going to be able to do this. And some of y'all will pick this up and you'll be so good at it, it'll be amazing. But if you take 10 guys, probably 3 or 4 will be really good at this, and 6 other ones will need to try something else. So if this doesn't work for you, don't get disgruntled, just try another technique. And I would recommend that Gapstinctive technique that I use now. But after you've got where you can hit this spot, pretty good, hit real close to it, then you want to go to 3D targets and start imagining a spot where you want to hit. And that old rule of mine, where you can take a paper plate and put it up there, if you can hit that plate 100% of the time, however far back you can go, that's going to be your distance. So don't try to take any shots at game past that. And bear in mind, a wild animal does not have a spot on it. It doesn't have a big white paper plate. It doesn't have anything like that. So, 3D targets are really good, but I would not start shooting at a 3D target until you've gotten where you can hit a spot every time. So I hope this works for you guys. If it doesn't, or even if it does and you want to see a method that I think is really good for most of us, refer back to my other video, that shooting the Gapstinctive. And main thing is that we're good with these things, and that we have fun, and that we make ethical shots on animals when we're hunting. So I'll see you guys next time. Matt Boyette, Buckhorn Hill Outdoors. Have a good week.